Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief. And today we're going to be talking about what's next and making sense of all the chaos that happened regarding Ukraine in the past week. And then we're going to discuss it together in the comments down below because I don't want to suffer alone, and I'm sure you don't want to suffer alone. So leave your thoughts, questions, suggestions, constructive criticism, anything in your mind. I read all of it. I really appreciate it, and I love this back and forth communication. Let's go. So, as we all know now regarding the peace talks, which, oh my gosh, I am so incredibly tired of talking about these peace talks because really they're not peace talks and they're really not that fruitful in terms of actually accomplishing what they were supposed to accomplish. But they have been very fruitful in terms of accomplishing action from Europe, in terms of accomplishing steps from Europe to make things better, and in terms of mobilizing the Ukrainian society to be very, very unified. But anyway, so as we all know at this point, both Putin Trump phone call happened and Zelensky Trump phone call happened. And Trump has commented on the phone call as, it went very, very well and it lasted over an hour. And they've discussed everything that they have discussed with Putin and more, and steps to make peace closer. Now, the US kind of fell flat on its face with these peace talks because there apparently was a misunderstanding between the White House and the Kremlin, where the White House insists that they had agreed to seize all strikes on infrastructure in Ukraine, both civilian power infrastructure and, any infrastructure that isn't military, while the Kremlin insists that they only agreed for a temporary ceasefire for power infrastructure in Ukraine, so like the energy grid. Now, let me tell you, it's not a misunderstanding. It's just that Putin absolutely does not stick to what he promises. And of course, likely on the phone call with Trump, he was like, yeah, we'll stop all strikes on the infrastructure temporarily. We're so ready for peace. And not even 40 minutes after that phone call, in which Trump was boasting that they've agreed to a ceasefire. Well, Putin rejected a 30-day ceasefire, but they've agreed to the ceasefire in Ukrainian infrastructure. What do you think happened?
Now, Russia and Ukraine are expected to exchange 175 prisoners of war today, as both sides accuse one another of launching aerial attacks on infrastructure overnight, with Ukraine saying Russian drones damaged 2 hospitals, forcing evacuations. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is monitoring all of these updates for us from the White House. Natalie, good morning to you. What else have we heard from this Trump-Putin call?
Good morning to you, Errol. Well, following this lengthy call, the headline that came out of it, according to the White House, is that the leaders agreed to a ceasefire on energy and infrastructure. But notably, Russia has not agreed to that full 30-day ceasefire that was agreed to by Ukraine during prior negotiations. Also, as you noted, there are reports of Russian strikes following this call. So that's something that we're going to have to learn more about today. Now, a Russian readout of this same call also noted that a key condition for working toward a resolution, according to the Kremlin, should be an end to foreign military aid and intelligence. Now, President Trump, in an interview with Fox News last night, said a lot of things were discussed during this call, but he said that aid specifically did not come up, according to the president. But really, what remains to be seen is the technical negotiations, which have not yet started. That is expected to happen later this week, beginning in the Middle East. Regarding this energy infrastructure and also a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. We've learned that Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, who's been involved in these negotiations, is expected to head to Saudi Arabia this weekend.
We know that the Ukrainians are skeptical that Russia will uphold its side of any bargain. So how does the U.S. plan to get Russia to stick to any agreement?
Yeah, and that's the big question that remains. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky noting his skepticism. He said that he wants to understand how this will work technically. He said President Trump has his phone number and he wanted a call, which could happen, as you noted, according to the AP, as early as today. Again, these technical discussions just getting started. I spoke to a professor from George Washington University who's an expert on this region. He said, really, what we need to watch here is for the continued negotiations for this larger ceasefire that would cover land operations, in addition to this more narrow ceasefire, addressing Russian President Vladimir Putin's continued effort to try to seize land and assets. Take a listen.
Now, the good news that I suppose came out of this is the White House decided to continue sharing intelligence with Ukraine for defense purposes, despite Putin's demands to halt it. And we heard that from our favorite press secretary of the White House, Caroline Leavitt. And at the same time, it's also when it came out that Putin rejected the 30-day ceasefire proposal. Surprise, surprise. I do know that Trump is very proud of himself to have started the negotiations at all on this entire situation. And I'm sure he's very, very proud of himself that he's reached an understanding with Putin. And he keeps, like one of the things that bugs me greatly is that every time he talks about Ukraine and Russia, he keeps talking up Putin as how easy he is to deal with, and Zelensky and Ukraine as how difficult we are to deal with. And it's so interesting because, yeah, of course, Putin is easy to deal with. He's just pushing out demands and attacking his neighbor. He's a dictator. It's kind of like, imagine having a phone call with Hitler in the 1940s and saying, it went swell. It was a blast. It was a hit. It went great. Obviously, having a conversation with the aggressor is easier to deal with, especially when you're already going into it with the idea that you can squeeze out more concessions from the victim, because technically that's what the US has been doing. And now the US has a brilliant plan for the second round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Those negotiations that went so well. I mean, so well.
Где вы находитесь? Мне прибыло заметить.
Можна повезли, цих я поодівала вже. Сама нікуди не їде, тому це я стану.
Я моя потенциальная шляпа.
Ты держи коляску. Коляску делаем. Оп, есть. Покажите. Тут на стиле, да? Да. Тут. Получается, как
where Putin agreed to hold strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure or electrical infrastructure, even though he didn't hold strikes on either, but that round of negotiations that paid off. Anyways, the US presidential envoy Keith Kellogg stated that the upcoming talks between the US, Ukraine, and Russia in Saudi Arabia will follow the proximity principle, with discussions taking place in adjacent rooms, aka the US delegation will include Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Michael Anton, and they will be responsible for basically managing between the two delegations. And here is the brilliancy in this. These will be talks based on the proximity principle, meaning one group will be in this room and the other group in that room, and they will sit, talk, go back and forth, something like shuttle diplomacy in a hotel, and that's how it will work. And then we will find out where all the parties stand, Kellogg explained. And while it would have been while it would have been a reasonable thing had both parties actually wanted peace and really wanted to settle something, in this scenario, it doesn't matter how close you put the Russian and Ukrainian delegation, they're never gonna be close together on the outcome, and they're never gonna think alike and never have any touching point, because Russia is not interested in peace. Clearly, Russia is not interested in peace. And we've seen that right after all of the previous talks happened. Someone who is interested in peace is not going to be blowing up all of the Ukrainian bridges. In fact, if you don't know how bad it is, because the news just shows you like all the worst stuff, and the news just shows you these like click-worthy pictures. Today, I saw a story from an aid worker in Sumy who does civilian evacuations and evacuations of animals from pre-frontline cities.
Привіт, ми зараз знаходимося.
Катя, летит!
And she was trapped on the other side because the bridge that they were going to take to evacuate the animals that they came to save was blown up by Russia. Then she personally witnessed 3 AFU vehicles be blown up and 2 aid cars. And she managed to get out of there alive, but this is an aid worker. This is an evacuation worker. And Russia does these things every day. Russia partakes in war crimes. Russia just decided to give Ukrainians on occupied territories, because those are Russia, till September to either self-deport or be deported, or arrange their documents to become Russian citizens, because Ukrainians without proper permission or a reason to be there shouldn't be living in the Russian territory. That's ethnic cleansing. That's Russia deporting people from their homes and forcing them to get a Russian citizenship while they're in occupation. So that then Russia can say, oh, but these are Russians. These territories are populated by ethnic Russians who speak Russian. See their Russian passports? And that's not looking for peace. And the fundamental mistake in all of this is Trump and his cabinet and his posse thinking that peace is possible, thinking that they're talking to Putin in order to reason with him on reasonable conditions. In reality, he's not talking to them to reason and to find conditions that work for both parties. He's talking to them because he wants the US to force Ukraine into his demands, because, of course, he can't win on the battlefield, but he can win through basically forcing America to force Ukraine's hand. And these are not negotiations. In reality, these are just, this is just farce, and this is just a political circus, basically. And Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, actually showed what type of a political circus this is with her words, and I think she described it so perfectly. I don't know. I mean, I was so proud of her when I read that, because it's the best way to show the hypocrisy in this, and the best way to show that Putin is really not interested in negotiating, right? Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni stated that extending NATO's Article 5 to Ukraine would be the simplest and most effective proposal, as it could reveal whether Putin is bluffing about further aggression. If Russia does not plan to invade its neighbors again, it is unclear why it should not accept security guarantees, she said, as quoted by Aska News. Speaking in the Chamber of Deputies ahead of the European Council meeting, Meloni emphasized that Italy would not blindly follow ineffective proposals from other countries. She stressed that security guarantees are the foundation of peace, and that Italy should actively contribute its own proposals rather than merely adopting those of others. Russia's main argument is that, like, oh, no NATO in Ukraine because NATO is going to attack Russia. Well, doesn't Russia trust the US? Because it seems like the US and Russia, or Trump and Putin, have a really good connection, right? And really trustworthy relationship. So Putin has no reason to not trust in Trump's word, right? And if Putin is not planning on attacking Ukraine or his other neighbors, why wouldn't he believe that NATO troops would be stationed in Ukraine for Ukraine's protection? Trump wouldn't send his troops or NATO troops allied countries' troops, right, to attack Russia, right? Because Trump is friendly to Putin. He's talking about all of these, potential partnerships and economic partnerships and stuff like that. So in reality, if Putin really wants peace, then for him it shouldn't matter if Italy and the UK and France send their troops to Ukraine as peacekeepers, right? Because they're not there to attack, they're there to protect. And why would you mind them protecting the border if you're saying that you're not going to attack further? And the guarantee is given to you by a guy that you supposedly respect so much and trust so much. Because Putin's not looking for peace, and the reason why he doesn't want Ukraine in NATO, and the reason why he doesn't want Ukraine to get weapons, and the reason why he doesn't want Ukraine to receive security guarantees is not because he's scared that NATO is going to attack him. There was never, ever a reason for him to think that NATO was going to attack. NATO was always a defense alliance. And also, now Sweden and Finland are in NATO. Now the NATO border along Russia's border has extended by so much. And the reason why he doesn't mind Sweden and Finland being there is because he wasn't planning on invading Sweden and Finland in the near future. But the reason why he minds Ukraine being in NATO is because he wants this sort of peace deal in order for, look at the conditions at which he's putting forth in this peace deal, right? The conditions are Ukraine can't rearm, Ukraine can't mobilize, Ukraine can't train its military, Ukraine can't have Western help, intelligence sharing shouldn't be allowed. Also, weapons to Ukraine shouldn't be coming from allies. Basically, Ukraine is not allowed to arm itself and to build defenses. Why? Why would he not want Ukraine to build defenses, right? Like, why would he care if Ukraine is building defenses under Trump's guise? Trump, who's guaranteeing that Ukraine's not attacking anyone, he's going to be overlooking it. It's because Putin wants this peace so he can rearm and Russia can rearm and Russia can continue getting intelligence and continue getting weapons from North Korea and China and from wherever and from Iran. Russia can continue getting foreign troops, and Russia can continue planning its further invasion. It's obvious as day, and it pains me so much that most people just like either ignore it or don't see it or look for excuses for it, because it's very, very evident. Again, if you're not planning on invading further, and as you said, you just want to finish this, you're ready for peace, and you just, you're just scared that you're going to be attacked. That's why all of these demands. Then, well, there is the US guaranteeing all of these things. There is the US being a guarantor, and there is the US that's friendly to you guaranteeing this. All of the previous agreements that have ever been signed with Putin have been broken and ended in Putin violating them and Putin overstepping and Putin basically invading again. So yeah, it is very safe to say that these are not peace talks. These are talks for Putin to get the best case scenario pause for himself so he can figure out how to most effectively erase Ukraine later, so he doesn't have to be stuck in this position again. Now, Emmanuel Macron is exploring alternatives to deploying European military forces in Ukraine, including the idea of establishing a mission under the UN to protect a potential peace agreement. This concept was discussed with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres during a European Council summit. However, such a UN peacekeeping mission would require approval from the Security Council, where both Russia and possibly the US could veto it, making its implementation uncertain. Not uncertain, but almost impossible, because Russia would, in fact, veto it. Anything that has to do with the UN, Russia is one of the founding members, and Russia has absolutely all of the pull and power to veto everything that Russia doesn't like and that Russia doesn't want. Why?
Yeah.
Additionally, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is signaling a shift in focus from sending European ground troops to providing air and naval support to Ukraine. There is also opposition within the EU from leaders like Giorgia Meloni and Donald Tusk, who view the deployment of European troops as costly and ineffective. These factors may complicate Macron's proposal. The thing is, like, Europe is united that they don't want to give in to Putin and they don't want to give Putin his demands, but they're divided in how to solve this. Honestly, in my humble opinion, the best idea would be to put European troops on the border with Ukraine and Belarus and in the areas not where the front line is, but where there could be a potential invasion from other places, from Belarus that's Russia friendly, from Transnistria. So the borders that are currently not being attacked should be protected by the European troops. That will take a lot of burden off of the Ukrainian military, and they can relocate to the front line and actually start taking back the territory of Ukraine, because they're not going to be needed, because this manpower is not going to be needed to protect the borders that haven't been invaded yet or face the, a potential of being invaded. And I think that honestly would be the best solution, and that would take the most burden off of Ukraine and would take the most burden off of everyone else. And that way, Putin can't say that there are NATO troops on the border of Russia and they're going to invade or whatever, because these troops are on the border of Belarus and they're on the border of Transnistria, Moldova, which he claims is just, a separate republic that Russia never invaded and they just wanted to be stuck in the USSR and not developing. So in that case, the peacekeeper troops are not anywhere near Russia, so you can't really use that argument. And they're taking the brunt off of the Ukrainian military, and that personnel that's trained, that's skilled, that's already just protecting the borders that are not being invaded can actually go to the front and protect the areas, and defend and protect the areas that need defense imminently, and also plan counter operations. And that way, I think it'd be much easier and faster for Ukraine to regain occupied territories, because Ukraine wouldn't have to worry about Russia invading from Belarus or Transnistria. But that's just my humble opinion. Anyways, I mean, obviously, all of the European leaders, especially at the summit, were saying that they are not keen on any of these peace proposals, because, to be fair, they're bogus. They're really, really bogus, and they don't necessarily mean a lot. And Zelensky did say that, his phone call with Trump was good and they discussed a lot. But you also need to understand that Zelensky needs to say these things because he needs to keep it good with Trump. I receive a lot of comments of people saying that, oh, I hope that Zelensky finally realized that he can't trust Trump after all of this. And I hope Zelensky is really not going to be counting on him. I think Zelensky does, in fact, realize all of these things. The problem is that he can't go on record and say, oh, hey, Trump is just aiding Russia and screwing Ukraine, because he has to diplomatically deal with this and get the best outcome possible for Ukraine. I mean, he did say that during the negotiation of Trump and Putin, recognizing Crimea as a Russian territory wasn't brought up, and that Crimea is Ukrainian land, and that this type of thing has not been spoken about at all and is not a part of the conversation. So at least there is that, and at least hopefully Trump is saying the truth in that. But then at the same time, it did come out in the New York Times, I believe, that Trump has been having unmonitored conversations with Putin for a while now. So those that that like the staff has no access to, and no notes are being taken, and these are in just a private line. So we don't really know what they're talking about. What we do know at this point is that Zelensky stands firm while trying to diplomatically assess the best outcome for Ukraine. He definitely doesn't trust the US or Russia. He's building a better relationship with Europe. Europe understands not to trust the United States. And, Russia is being Russia and hoping for the best case scenario for it, where it can freeze the conflict and rearm itself while completely putting Ukraine to its knees. And I wonder if you've noticed, and I'm sure you did, that there were lots of news about airstrikes in Ukraine that just came on randomly on screen and kind of interrupted me. I'm sure it bugged you. Well, this is what Russian peace looks like when you live in Ukraine. That's what it feels like. constant interruptions of your life or of something that you're doing by airstrikes and drone strikes, even though, we supposedly agreed in a temporary ceasefire on both civilian and energy infrastructure. That's all I have for you for today. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the news brief, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next episode comes out. And of course, as per usual, give this video a like, send it to a friend, your mom, your grandma, whoever you think might want to listen and would be interested, and leave your comments, questions, suggestions, thoughts down below. I'll read all of them and I enjoy hearing from you guys. Till next time.